So today's agenda is really to understand what is AI governance, what are the core requirements, what does implementation roadmap looks like on a very high level, and obviously that will change from company to company based on their needs, based on their current maturity, current um, implementation status, strategy, and whatnot. So what is AI governance, right? Now, AI governance in general, it's basically understanding. What an AI is to start with, right? What are the current governance practices that could be incorporated from an AI perspective or from an AI context? And ISO 42001 standard, I think some of you would know about it, or probably most of you would know about it. So ISO 42001 standard is a global standard that was, I think, released in 2023, and sort of getting operationalized from the start of this year. So it's important to understand that why this is really crucial for the companies to take a call around whether do we need to whether do we need to implement a 42001, whether do we need to implement a tailored approach and whatnot, right? But then, as a standard rule of thumb, and going by my own experience in the Australian market and in the UK market, since I'm working with some of the clients alongside my peers from based out of UK. So based on going by my personal experience working, through the AI governance from the last couple of months or years, I would say that companies are heavily trying to rely on a particular standard, 40 vis-a-vis 42001. This gives them um, a proper streamlined process of what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, why is it important, and sort of align with the industry best practices, if you will. Right. Now, what is AI governance to start with, right? Now, AI governance, like you would know, that governance in general, right? So, be it ISMS, which is Information Security Management System, your ISO 27001, right? Now, similar to that, it's a group of policies, processes, and accountability that is established, structured for the use of responsible AI. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that whatever AI tool, like Gen AI tool, or implementing LLM or integrating existing LLM models with my product services that we are renting it to the client. So whatever model or the way that we would be working with AI, essentially what we are getting down to or narrowing it down to is that we are using AI responsibly, right? Now we have had seen cases wherein AI is either used for malicious purposes, could be a gender bias, could be biasness in terms of providing information, model drift. These are some few risks that essentially associated um, with the use of AI. So at the end of the day, what are we trying to achieve is responsibly using AI, right? And that's all. Now, in my experience, and this is something that I've implemented, implemented AI governance practices in one of these companies, took us a few months, is not by creating different policies, standalone policies, processes, and whatnot. It's essentially understanding your existing process and integrating those AI related stuff in the existing process, right? Now, it's a bit distinct from IT governance because AI introduces, like I said before, AI introduces bias, opacity, unpredictability, and autonomous decision making, right? Now, if you go back to, and this is something that I recently presented in one of the conferences here in Australia. So there's a place called Newcastle. And we have had a conference wherein, it was an audience of chief risk officers, ISOs, and whatnot. And I've had the opportunity to present on the AI governance. And one of the examples that we gave was that AI doesn't introduce new set of risks, it amplifies your existing risk, right? So you would already have some sort of biasness risk in place. You would have some sort of unpredictability risk in place, and even decision making. Maybe not autonomous, maybe partially. I don't know, right? But then, point being that um, essentially what we are getting down to is that it doesn't introduce new set of whole new world of risks. Essentially it's amplifying your existing risk, right? That's where we are coming down to. Now, having said that, we have got a standard. Like I said, that ISO 42001, it's an international standard for AI management system, right? Now, if most of you or if some of you wouldn't know about ISO 27001 or ISMS or how does it work in general, it's called management system for a reason, right? So management system meaning that you're creating a set of processes, you're creating a set of um, I would say a management system in place that helps you govern AI, information security, cybersecurity, could be anything, right? Now, a last few points around what are the core pillars of AI governance, right? So accountability, your transparency, fairness, security, of course, and human oversight, right? Now, linking back to my previous point, wherein I just mentioned around something around the autonomous decision maker, right? Um, Now, in terms of autonomous decision making, we need to make sure that even though we are using AI for, amplified productivity, for example, or higher sense of gain in terms of revenue, in terms of, again, going back to productivity, in terms of output and whatnot, there needs to be a human in the loop that verifies the output, that verifies the entire process, whether it is working as intended and it is working as expected, right? So human oversight is damn crucial. We cannot escape that. Any standard framework that you would pick, maybe 42001 NIST AIRMF, or pick any goddamn standard or framework related to AI, all of them would talk about human in the loop, right? So you need to have skilled human in the loop to make sure that whatever output that the AI is generating, whatever AI is working on in terms of data set and whatnot, it's accurate, it's up to date, and it's working as intended, right? Now, EU AI Act, it's one of the first AI acts in the world. It brings regulatory risk because if you don't align with AI risk, AI EU Act, specifically in the European Union market, right? Because it's very emphasized on the EU market. Other countries are following the trend, but it's not enforced as EU AI Act is at the moment, right? It really helps them to create regulatory risk that the companies would have to abide by, try to mitigate it, and sort of force forcefully sort of let the companies implement some sort of AI governance in place. It also gives them a competitive advantage, and obviously that builds up the trust, right? Now, this is in terms of the EU market. What about other markets? If you would have that question, right? Because we would have that question anyway, right? Now, in these sort of cases wherein you don't have a forcible act in a particular country, it is challenging, right? Now, I've started to see a trend wherein third party risk management, for example, right? So if you're trying to procure a third party or a vendor for a specific service, product, or whatever, the companies are now getting asked whether do you have AI in place, right? How do you use AI? How do you use Gen AI? Do you have AI in your products and services, right? And how are we governing it? Do you have policies in place? Do you have processes in place? Do you have technical controls in place? Whatever, right? Point being, point being that it is getting pretty real, right? Companies are getting stressed about the responsible use of AI and the controls around it, and they would have to obviously pick up something and like your 42001 or something similar and align themselves according to that, right? Now, why is it different, right? Your traditional IT governance, like 27001 or anything, are those focuses on known and deterministic systems, right? AI systems, on the other hand, on the flip side, it evolves, it learns and evolves, right? Now, the governance, again, like I said before, it doesn't introduce new set of risk. The risk previously was known, it was deterministic. We knew that these sort of risks exist. With AI, it amplifies in a pace, in a way that, it gets evolved every minute, every second, every day, right? And that's where the problem lies, right? I'm not sure how many of you would have read about the recent IBM report, the cost of data breach and the other sort of side of things, and also the CrowdStrike threat intel report in the last few months that was really, I think it was released a couple of months back. Um, Essentially, last year, um, the attack vector was pretty different, and this year it's completely different, right? Now it would take on an average. I'm just taking an example, but then it you can refer back to the real CrowdStrike or the original CrowdStrike report. Now last year, I think the average time for a hacker to get into a system was noted around 49 minutes or maybe around an hour, right? This year, however, on the flip side, it was somewhere around 24 minutes, right? And it was all because of the use of AI, right? Not that AI is doing something very different. For example, phishing, right? Now, historically, phishing would have taken you manual effort to create web pages, maybe some of the GitHub repos that's out there that would automate things for you, right? But it doesn't learn and evolve to my point, right? Now, with AI, it's now very easy for literally a noob to go on and create a phishing site and whatnot, right? So the time to actually attack and get into a system has reduced by 50%, right? So you can imagine that how evolving and how difficult is to cope up with the AI advancement in the market, right? AI can also produce discriminatory outputs, right? That's why it's important to have a human in the loop, right? AI decisions are oftentimes opaque, right? Explainability is not a compliance requirement. Now, this is something that you would see in your own experience, right? I'm sure that all of us are using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini in some capacity, right? In one way or the other, in any of the use cases, we're using these tools on a day-to-day basis, right? You would see that most of the times the that comes through, it's not it's not the best output, right? You still need to give more context. You still need to give bit more detail around what exactly are we looking at, what exactly do you need, and then you get to a point wherein you are actually, you actually think that, what, now this is right. Now this is the output that I was looking to. Maybe you're not 100%, but it's very close to what I was expecting, right? Now, this is where your opaqueness comes into play, right? That these things, specifically from an explainability point of view, it's becoming a mandatory requirement that you have to make sure that whatever output that comes out of AI, I mean, specifically in a B2B or in a business setting, you have to provide some factual data to back it up. Your third party AI, like your APIs, obviously we 99% of the times you're going to use a third party vendor like Anthropic, OpenAI, ChatGPT, right? Google or Perplexity or whatever, right? You're going to use them in one way or the other. Now, specifically with these AI models or the LLM models, you'd be using API keys. You'd be generating API keys using API in one way or the other. That creates another set of risk. Again, existing risk, right? It's not a new risk. Supply chain risk has been there for decades now, right? It's just getting amplified with the use of AI, and that's where it creates that supply chain risk. And that is beyond our perimeter, right? Um, NIST CSF 2.0, which is a cybersecurity framework, had an update pretty recently, maybe a year back, right? It refreshed their whole framework after, I think, after 7 or 8 years or something. It was pretty massive. Um, Now, the one of the key controls that they had focused on was supply chain, and even that is addressed in 42001, right? It's a key risk, existing risk, which is amplified by the use of AI. Okay. Um, AI system can degrade over time, right? I'm not sure if some of you would know about this. But then last year, ChatGPT released a model called GPT 4.0. After they had released, they realized that, you know what, it's agreeing with everything that a human is asking for, right? Even if you ask, something which is not true, which is not factually right, the model will still agree with you, right? And it was one of the shittiest model that ChatGPT would have pushed into production, right? Within 5 days of releasing that model, they rolled back the update. They took some time, made sure that the model is in working as intended, and then they rolled out the update again in the next couple of months. So point being that even the AI systems can degrade over time. Now, the technical term for this is, and you might want to go back and search, it's called model drift. Okay. So model drift is very real. There are, I mean, I would say there are not so many cases of model drift owing to the regular releases of the models and whatnot. There are not so many cases, but having said that, it's still a big issue, and it's gonna when it comes here, when it impacts, the impact's gonna be pretty massive. Some of the core requirements is to understand your leadership requirement, your risk assessment, and I'm going to show you one of the risk assessment sheets. Again, that's not an actual client risk assessment conducted, but what I've done is I've taken some of the key risks from there, cleaned the sheet up, and then just for the purpose of this presentation. So some of the key requirements from AI governance, again, going back to your management system, is to conduct a thorough risk assessment, right? Defining accountability at a leadership level, right? Defining your context and scope, that what AI systems are we talking about, mapping the relevant key stakeholder who is accountable for that, and making sure that they are held accountable if something goes wrong, right? That's again, it's not something new. This has been going on since decades, and and whatnot. It's just that it's now being amplified in relation to AI, as it relates to AI. Okay. Um, and defining your controls across your AI lifecycle. Now, when I say AI lifecycle, again, nothing new. It's pretty standard. Your secure software development lifecycle, so secure SDLC, it's pretty similar to that. When you onboard a new AI, your third-party risk management would also play a key role here. So when you onboard an AI tool or AI related stuff, you need to conduct a thorough risk assessment. You need to make sure that it's relevant to your business. You need to make sure that a number of things are taken care of and whatnot, right? Human oversight, very important. Like I said before, transparency and explainability, wherein it reduces the mitigates the risk of your model drift. Again, very important. Okay. Now, what I'll do is I'll show you. So this is one of the again, I've cleaned the sheet up just for this presentation. Now, risk assessment. If some of you don't know, that's fine. But then you might want to go back and do a bit of research on what a risk assessment is. So risk assessment is basically identifying the risk, calculating the risk. So your risk calculation is generally a 5 by 5 matrix, a matrix between your likelihood and impact. Okay, so your consequences and the probability of happening that risk, right? Based on the risk appetite of the organization, you will be creating a 5 by 5 matrix, assigning values that what is critical, what is high, what is medium, and whatnot, and then you go from there, right? Now, if you see your values from 16 to 25, it's classified as critical. It's not because it needs to be standard or it is standard. It is because that would be dependent on the organization's risk appetite and the risk statement, right? Once you have identified the risk, you would be assigning values of the probability of that risk happening. What is the impact of that risk? And then you'll be calculating the inherent risk, assigning controls. So inherent risk, you'll be calculating the inherent risk rating, meaning that if there are no controls in place, if there are no safeguard mechanisms in place, then what is my risk looks like, right? And then you apply the controls, how effective the control is, and then you assign the residual risk rating. It's pretty much doing the same thing, but after applying the control, right? And then your recommended actions, who would be the risk owner, and what is your target date. So it's a very, very high level, 30,000 feet, 30,000 feet level understanding of what a risk assessment is, right? Now, as it relates to I would say, just let's take an example, right? Um, say malicious user craft prompt injection attack. So prompt injection attack, pretty relevant to AI, very real. It has happened quite a few times now in the industry, even with some of the bigger names out there in the market. So say that there's a risk of a malicious user crafting a prompt injection attack to manipulate the chatbot in revealing internal data, or even bypassing some of the controls and the guardrails in place, right? Um, the likelihood of it happening, it's medium. I would say it's a 4. to be honest, right? It's a highly likely that it's going to happen because it's one of the largest attack vector for as it relates to AI. If it happens, it's going to be pretty massive, okay, and leading to that the inherent risk itself is very high. Now, to mitigate such a risk from a prompt injection perspective, to mitigate such a risk, you would be having some guardrails, you would have some filtration, or you would have some safeguard mechanisms in place to reduce the like either the likelihood or the impact or both, right? From a prompt injection perspective. So some of the controls, again, not an exhaustive list, is just for, it's just to help you understand what in real life it looks like, so that you get an idea, you get a look and feel of how exactly it looks like, and you can sort of establish your understanding from there on, right? So say that you have got some controls like your yeah, so say you have got some controls, something related to content filtering, right? Related to input length, right? And saying that in a way that this is the controls that we have applied, the guardrails that we have applied are actually working fine. So say that imagine that instead of partial, it's actually effective. In that case, you're reducing the risk, right? Now, now, point being that all of these that you see here is conducted, was used to be conducted only for information security from an ISMS from a 27001 perspective. However, with the introduction of AI and the risk landscape that has changed so significantly in the last 2 years, at least, to say the least, the companies have started to conduct these risk assessments as it relates to AI as well, right? It's important, right? It's important that you identify such a risk. If even if you in your company you see that there are no risk assessments conducted as it relates to AI, you might want to start looking at those stuff, right? Implementation roadmap, mm, from a company's perspective, right? Now, when we are implementing, when we are trying to implement a manual, what are the things that we need to make sure of, right? You need to make sure, even before conducting in phase one that you see from month 0 to 3, even before conducting a gap assessment against 42001, you need to make sure that we have the entire inventory of AI in whatever capacity that we are using, right? So there needs to be an AI inventory. You cannot govern, or I would say, you cannot predict what you can't see, right? And that's literally 95% of the problem. That's literally the problem for 95% of the companies, right? And this goes for my personal experiences as well. Whatever client that I'm working with as it relates to AI security or even AI governance, there are a lot of shadow AI practices in place. Now, there was a concept of shadow IT, which is still a problem till date. But then, having said that, on top of that, um, you've got shadow AI problem as well, right? Classic example, even with you guys, I'm pretty sure you would have come across this, that if say that you're working in a company and your acceptable use policy or your company policy says that, you know what, you should only be using Copilot because that is our approved AI tool, and that we are on an enterprise licensing, and that's what you're going to use, right? However, a lot of employees are using ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, other AI tools, whatever it's present, unless it's completely locked down, right? In most of the cases, it wouldn't be, and then you would go ahead and use it, right? Now, does can company govern all of the AI tools that's not approved in place for a large employee base? Maybe not, right? Can a company govern the files being uploaded on those portals? Maybe not, right? Now, these things becomes as a part of a bigger problem of shadow AI, right? And that's why, coming back to my original point, that we need to have an AI inventory. We need to understand what's being used at the moment, so that even if you can't control in today's date, even if you can't control something at some point in time, you'd still know that, all right, we can't control at the moment, but we know what the risk is, we know what's happening. So let's plan it out and let's see if this can be dealt with in the next 6 months or whatever, right? Assign AI policy owner and get an AI use policy first thing first, right? Because like I said before, that with the rapid use of AI in this state, it's becoming immensely impossible to govern each and every tool unless you have something in place, right? So if you don't, as a company, if you don't have something at the moment, you might wanna get an AI inventory done, and then obviously get an AI use policy, acceptable use policy, roll that out company wide, and then you go from there. In the phase two, usually once you know what you have, once you have let the employees know, like, creating an AI use policy and, defining basic roles and responsibilities and whatnot, then you move on to risk assessments, right? Now, the risk assessment sheet that I showed you earlier, that's what I was speaking of, right? So something similar to that doesn't have to be exactly that. Obviously, it will look different from company to company, and you cannot. It's not a one size fit all sort of approach, right? So it will differ from company to company for sure. But point being that we need to conduct a risk assessment. Point being that we need to sort of get to a point wherein we actually conduct a risk assessment and we go from there. De- Derive the controls, develop the controls, and then create awareness and training sessions across the organization. Your next phase should be monitoring. Once you have deployed the foundational aspect of AI governance, once we have deployed, and once we know that this is what it looks like, and this is what we are gonna look at from an AI governance perspective, the next thing would be how can uphold this practice over a period of time. That becomes a part of your BAU, right? So any detecting model drift, anomalies, incident, right? Whatever, it needs to be incorporated into your standard BAU. Conducting internal audits, very, very, very important. Okay, so my team recently concluded an internal audit for one of the bigger organizations based out of Australia against AIMS, and it was a mess, right? It was a mess because it was not properly understood by the company what exactly needs to be done, how it needs to be done, what is the ask. Again, going back to the inventory and stuff, it's a lot of problems, right? So there needs to be a continuous improvement loop that internal audit gives you that flexibility and that approach so that you can update controls as the AI evolves. Okay. And the last one is really getting certification, right? Now, to prove that you have put such an effort, for the 12 months, 24 months and whatnot, you're putting a huge effort in maintaining that management system, you might want to get certified. Again, it's optional, it's not mandatory. Unless your clients are asking for it, unless you're being asked that you actually needs to get certified and whatnot, fine. You can deal with that. You can go away with that. Like for one of the um, listed companies based out of Melbourne that I'm currently working with, the board of directors have specifically asked and given them a target that by next June they should be ISO 42001 certified, right? So again, as these things becomes grow bigger and bigger across the world, you would see that this will be a new normal, right? To be honest. So that's that. Some of the key takeaways that AI governance is no longer optional. There are regulatory pressures, specifically in the EU market, and a lot of countries are following that trend. Like recently, Australia even announced that they're going to have something similar. It's in draft. It's in discussion. We have got some guidance from the government as well, but then it's not finalized yet. But yeah, it will be here sooner rather than later, right? Start with your AI inventory. You cannot control what you don't know or what you cannot see, right? Conducting risk assessment, very important. 42001, it's a proven framework because it piggybacks the information security management system, which is your 27001. Since it piggybacks 27001, it's already proven that management system works perfectly fine, right? And with obviously with the evolving threat and evolving the nature of AI in the next couple of months or years that we would see, there will be amendments in place. But as a management system, it works, right? If you're already 27001 certified, as a company, you already have, I wouldn't even say 40%, right? I can confidently say that you're at least 55 to 60% already there, right? You have a management system in place. The rest 40% will come into play in terms of what kind of, how are you leveraging AI in your organization, and then how you can integrate into your existing processes, right? Start small, document everything, and it's a continuous process. It's not an overnight success. It needs to be done, in smaller bites, and you'll see that that forms a bigger part of the picture over a period of time.